When a narcissist crosses divine boundaries. Not every conflict is personal, and not every attack is human in origin. Some battles are not about personality clashes, misunderstandings, or poor communication. Some battles begin the moment someone decides to tamper with what does not belong to them. A narcissist rarely believes they are doing anything wrong. They see people as extensions, roles, tools, mirrors. They push boundaries, test limits, manipulate emotions, and erode identity because that is how they maintain power. But there is a line they do not recognize, a line that does not announce itself with threats or warnings. That line is crossed the moment a narcissist begins messing with someone God has set apart. To mess with does not mean a single argument or a moment of tension. It means sustained interference. It means manipulation, gaslighting, control, spiritual distortion, emotional erosion. It means attempting to diminish the peace, clarity, calling, or moral grounding of another human being. God's chosen are not protected because they are perfect. They are protected because they belong to an order the narcissist does not understand. And the moment that order is violated, consequences do not need to be announced. They begin. And the first consequence does not appear in public. It begins inside the narcissist. The first consequence: loss of control. Control is not a preference for the narcissist. It is the structure that keeps their inner world from collapsing. A narcissist does not seek connection in the way healthy people do. Connection requires presence, accountability, and mutuality. Control does not. Control allows distance. Control allows superiority. Control allows escape from the self. They regulate the emotional climate because regulation replaces stability. They learn how to press certain emotional buttons: fear, guilt, confusion, admiration, not because they enjoy cruelty, but because reaction gives them orientation. Reaction tells them who they are in the room. Reaction tells them where power sits. As long as they can provoke a predictable response, they feel grounded. As long as you explain, defend, justify, apologize, or react emotionally, the system holds. They may appear confident, even dominant, but that confidence is borrowed. It exists only as long as someone else participates. This is why manipulation feels natural to them. Gaslighting reshapes perception. Withholding affection reshapes behavior. Escalation reshapes attention. Charm reshapes memory. Each tactic is not random, it is regulatory. It keeps the narcissist from having to confront the emptiness underneath. But something fundamentally destabilizing happens when a person God has chosen stops reacting, not retaliating, not pleading, not correcting the record, not proving innocence, not chasing closure. Just a quiet withdrawal of emotional participation. To the narcissist, this is not neutrality. It feels like disappearance. They escalate because escalation has always worked before. They repeat accusations louder, not wiser. They reintroduce old narratives, hoping familiarity will restore control. They alternate between threat and charm, cruelty and remorse, pressure and affection. They provoke, they bait, they test. And for the first time, nothing lands. No emotional surge to absorb. No panic to harvest. No guilt to weaponize. No reassurance to extract. The silence of God's chosen is not indifference. It is disengagement from manipulation. This is the moment the narcissist senses a shift they cannot name. Not a change in mood, but a change in structure. They are no longer directing the emotional climate. They are no longer shaping the narrative. They are no longer anticipating the outcome. Most unsettling of all, they are no longer the center. What slips from their hands is not simply influence, it is certainty. The certainty that they know how this ends. The certainty that pressure will eventually break resistance. The certainty that control can always be regained if applied with enough force. When that certainty collapses, fear enters. Not fear of abandonment in a healthy sense, but fear of exposure, because without control, the narcissist is left alone with the self they have spent a lifetime avoiding. A self without applause, without reflection, without regulation, and that encounter is intolerable. This is why the loss of control does not produce reflection. It does not lead to repentance. It does not soften the heart. It produces anxiety, agitation, and urgency. The narcissist begins to act out, not because they are evil, but because the mechanism that once protected them from inner disorder has failed. This is the first terrifying consequence of messing with God's chosen. Not public humiliation, not immediate judgment, but the quiet collapse of the control structure that held the narcissist together. The second consequence: internal panic and unraveling. A narcissist does not panic because a relationship has ended. They panic because their reflection has vanished. For the narcissist, relationships are not primarily bonds of affection or mutual care. They are mirrors. They are reflective surfaces through which the narcissist confirms identity, power, and a sense of existence. Without reflection, the narcissist does not feel diminished. They feel unreal. God's chosen often function as unusually powerful mirrors, not because they flatter or inflate ego, but because they are grounded. They carry stability into unstable environments. They carry moral orientation where values are blurred. They carry spiritual weight that silently orders what is chaotic. Their presence does not amplify narcissism. It regulates it. Their calm steadies emotional volatility. Their clarity limits confusion. Their consistency restrains excess. And that is why, when that presence withdraws, the narcissist does not experience relief. They experience exposure. Left alone with themselves, the narcissist encounters something they have spent a lifetime avoiding: an unregulated inner world. This inner world has no anchor, no rhythm, no center. The result is not peace. It is noise. Thoughts accelerate without direction. Emotions spike without warning. The mind becomes crowded, restless, loud. They experience agitation they cannot explain. Nights where the body is exhausted, but the mind refuses to settle. A constant hum of unease that no distraction fully silences. They replay conversations obsessively, not to understand them, but to regain control over them. They mentally reconstruct exchanges, adjusting details, motives, and outcomes, trying to rewrite reality in a way that restores dominance. They oscillate between rage and self-pity, between blaming the other person and portraying themselves as the victim, between grandiosity and collapse. This is not remorse. Remorse requires accountability. This is disorientation. Without someone else regulating emotional reality for them, the narcissist begins to fracture internally. The structure that once held them together weakens. The internal scaffolding collapses. Behavior becomes inconsistent. They say things they later deny with confidence. They make decisions they later regret but refuse to own. They act impulsively, driven by urgency rather than intention. They overreach. They push too hard. They escalate too quickly. What once appeared calculated now appears desperate. The panic is not dramatic at first. It is subtle. It moves beneath the surface, shaping tone, timing, and reaction. It alters pacing. It sharpens responses that do not fit the moment. But panic does not stay hidden. It leaks through contradictions, through exaggerated reactions, through disproportionate responses to minor events. In this state, the narcissist begins to expose what control once concealed. The mask they carefully maintained slips not because someone tore it off, but because panic makes sustained performance impossible. They cannot keep the story straight. They cannot regulate their image. They cannot maintain the illusion of stability. What emerges is not always immediately identified as panic by others, but it is felt. Something feels off. Something feels unstable. Something no longer adds up. People sense the incoherence, even if they cannot yet name it. This is the second terrifying consequence of messing with God's chosen. Not because the chosen person retaliated, not because judgment was announced, but because the narcissist's inner disorder, once hidden behind control, has lost its cover. And once panic takes hold, it does not remain contained. It drives behavior. It accelerates exposure. It pushes the narcissist into actions that reveal far more than silence ever could. Because panic always exposes what control once concealed. The third consequence, exposure without you speaking. One of the most difficult lessons for God's chosen to learn is this: you do not have to defend yourself for truth to surface. After prolonged manipulation, many people carry a quiet fear that if they do not speak, the lie will win. They believe silence equals defeat. They believe truth requires explanation, clarification, or proof. But divine order does not operate on human urgency. When a narcissist loses control and enters sustained panic, their mask does not fall because someone tears it away. It falls because panic makes performance impossible. Control once allowed the narcissist to curate reality. It allowed them to manage tone, timing, and perception. They could say just enough, withhold just enough, and shift narratives without consequence. Panic dismantles that precision. They begin to contradict themselves not once, but repeatedly. Statements, once delivered with certainty, are later denied without awareness. Facts change depending on the audience. Motives are reassigned. History is rewritten in real time. They over-explain what once required no explanation. They insist where confidence once carried them. They add details that do not belong, hoping excess will substitute for coherence. They accuse too much. Projection, once subtle, becomes blatant. They assign intentions, emotions, and motives to others that mirror their own internal disorder. What was once calculated becomes reactive. What was once strategic becomes emotional. People who once believed them may not immediately say something is wrong, but they begin to feel it. The tone feels off. The intensity feels unnecessary. The urgency feels revealing. Charm, which once disarmed suspicion, loses its weight. It feels forced, performative, out of rhythm. What once sounded persuasive now sounds excessive. What once felt confident now feels unstable. And all of this unfolds without a single word from the one who was harmed. God does not require you to expose the narcissist. He allows instability to expose itself. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of divine justice. It does not arrive through confrontation. It does not need accusation. It does not demand your participation. The narcissist becomes their own witness. Every attempt to preserve their image accelerates its collapse. Every effort to control perception produces new evidence of disorder. Every attempt to dominate the narrative reveals how desperately they need to. They speak when silence would protect them. They react where restraint would serve them. They explain what no one asked them to explain. The mask does not shatter in a single dramatic moment. It erodes. Small contradictions accumulate. Minor inconsistencies repeat. Patterns become visible. People begin to pause before believing. They begin to listen differently. They begin to trust less. This exposure is not humiliation. It is correction. Reality quietly reasserts itself. For God's chosen, this stage carries an essential truth. You are not responsible for defending your character. You are not required to prove your innocence. You are not obligated to manage how others perceive reality. Silence, when aligned with truth, becomes protection. Because panic always reveals what control once concealed, and once credibility weakens, once the image no longer holds, distance naturally follows. People begin to step back. Conversations shorten. Access narrows. The fourth consequence, isolation and supply collapse. A narcissist is not sustained by love. They are sustained by supply. This distinction is critical. Love requires reciprocity. Love requires presence. Love requires the ability to recognize another person as separate and whole. Supply requires none of that. Supply is attention, reaction, validation, conflict, admiration, even fear. Supply is emotional fuel, anything that confirms relevance, influence, and control. As long as supply flows, the narcissist feels anchored in the world. As long as someone reacts, explains, defends, or engages, the narcissist feels real. This is why silence is so destabilizing. It does not merely remove communication, it removes orientation. God's chosen provide a rare and powerful form of supply, not because they inflate ego, but because they bring order. Their calm presence stabilizes chaos. Their moral clarity grounds confusion. Their emotional steadiness regulates volatility. They do not mirror grandiosity. They reflect reality, and that reflection, steady, restrained, anchored in truth, does something no ordinary supply can do. It holds the narcissist together. This is why their presence is so sustaining, and this is why it is so threatening. When that supply is removed, the narcissist does not grieve the person. They scramble to replace the function. They do not ask, "Who did I lose?" They ask, "Where do I get regulation now?" They seek new audiences, new allies, new targets. They reinsert themselves into social spaces. They intensify visibility. They initiate new conflicts. They pursue admiration, sympathy, outrage, anything that produces reaction. But something is different now. The replacement does not satisfy. The drama feels hollow. The validation fades quickly. What once energized them now feels thin, short-lived, insufficient. They receive attention and feel nothing. They provoke reactions and feel empty. They dominate conversations and still feel unseen. Why? Because the narcissist is not replacing a person. They are attempting to replace order. And order cannot be substituted. Order is not charisma. It is not intensity. It is not volume or presence. Order is not a personality trait someone else can imitate convincingly. Order exists when someone lives aligned with truth, restraint, and inner coherence. When that stabilizing presence is gone, the narcissist may surround themselves with people, but they cannot recreate the structure that once held them together. So, supply begins to collapse. Not all at once, not dramatically, quietly. Attention no longer regulates. Conflict no longer energizes. Admiration no longer steadies the soul. The emotional ecosystem that once fed them stops working. They cannot regulate themselves through others the way they once did. They cannot stabilize their inner world through reaction alone. This is when isolation begins. Not always externally, often internally. They may be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly alone. They may be admired and still feel hollow. They may be engaged and still feel disconnected. This is one of the most misunderstood consequences. From the outside, it can look like nothing happened. Life continues. The narcissist appears functional, social, even successful. But internally, something essential has collapsed. The inner scaffolding that allowed them to feel anchored through others is gone. They feel unseen, even when surrounded, unfulfilled, even when praised, empty, even when admired. And because narcissists do not tolerate emptiness well, they often respond by escalating behavior. More stimulation, more reaction, more intensity. But escalation only deepens the problem. Because the issue is not the quantity of supply, it is the quality of order. No amount of noise can replace alignment. This is why nothing satisfies anymore. They are not missing a person. They are missing coherence. They are missing the quiet, internal stability that comes from being anchored to something real. And that absence cannot be filled by attention. As supply collapses, isolation becomes unavoidable, not as punishment, but as consequence. The narcissist is left increasingly alone with themselves, without the stabilizing presence they once disrupted. And in that growing isolation, when attention no longer soothes, when admiration no longer steadies, when conflict no longer energizes, the fifth consequence, loss of peace. Peace is not an emotion, it is alignment. It is the quiet stability that comes from living in harmony with moral truth, inner coherence, and spiritual order. It does not depend on circumstances. It is not produced by success. It cannot be manufactured by control. God's chosen carry peace, not because life has been easy for them, but because they have learned to live aligned with conscience, with truth, and with God. That alignment produces steadiness. It produces restraint. It produces a calm that does not need to be explained or defended. A narcissist who violates that order does not steal peace from another. They forfeit their own. This loss does not happen dramatically. There is no sudden collapse, no visible breakdown at first. Instead, peace withdraws quietly. They become restless even in moments that should feel satisfying. Success no longer settles them. Victory no longer tastes sweet. What once brought pleasure now feels flat. What once energized them now irritates them. They win arguments and feel nothing. They achieve goals and feel hollow. They receive admiration and remain uneasy. Silence becomes unbearable. In stillness, the noise inside grows louder. Thoughts race. Emotions spike without cause. The mind searches constantly for stimulation, distraction, or validation. No achievement settles them. No distraction sustains them. They fill their days with activity but cannot rest. They fill their nights with noise but cannot sleep. From the outside, they may appear fine, functional, engaged, even successful, but internally there is constant agitation, an unease that cannot be named, a dissatisfaction that cannot be resolved, a restlessness that does not respond to control. This is not punishment, it is consequence. You cannot disturb peace and live peacefully. Peace cannot coexist with sustained manipulation. It cannot remain where boundaries are violated, where truth is distorted, where others are treated as objects rather than souls. The narcissist may attempt to recreate peace through dominance, through image management, through external order. But peace does not respond to force. It responds only to alignment, and alignment has been broken. This is why the loss of peace is so destabilizing for the narcissist. It removes the final illusion that control equals safety. Without peace, the narcissist becomes increasingly reactive, more impatient, more irritable, more desperate to regain a sense of inner balance through external means. But the harder they try to control the world around them, the further peace retreats. Because peace cannot be taken, it can only be kept. And it is kept through humility, truth, and restraint, the very qualities narcissism rejects. While the narcissist descends into unrest, something very different happens to the one they tried to harm. God's chosen do not lose peace in separation. They recover it. With distance comes clarity. With silence comes steadiness. With boundaries comes rest. The calm that once felt threatened begins to return. Sleep deepens. The mind settles. The heart no longer braces for impact. This contrast is not accidental. Peace returns to the place where order is restored, and unrest remains where order has been violated. This is the fifth and most enduring consequence of messing with God's chosen. Not disgrace, not exposure, not isolation, but the slow realization that peace has left and cannot be forced to return. And once peace is gone, every other instability intensifies. Because without peace, nothing holds. And from that loss, the final reversal becomes clear. The one that reveals who was truly protected all along. The reversal. God's chosen, protected through silence. What appears to be retreat is often protection in its purest form. One of the most persistent misunderstandings in both spiritual and psychological conflict is the belief that silence equals weakness, that withdrawal signals defeat, that refusing to engage means surrendering ground. This belief is deeply ingrained, especially in those who have been conditioned to survive through explanation, defense, and emotional effort. But for God's chosen, silence is not avoidance. It is alignment. When the narcissist loses peace and descends into unrest, the chosen one does not follow them downward. They do not enter the spiral. They do not attempt to stabilize chaos. They step out of the storm entirely. They stop explaining. They stop defending. They stop reacting. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer need to prove what truth will eventually reveal on its own. This is the reversal. The narcissist assumes silence, restores their power. They believe distance will provoke pursuit. They expect disengagement to trigger fear. But silence does not empower them. It removes their access. No reaction to manipulate. No emotion to regulate. No energy to siphon. What once felt like control suddenly meets a boundary it cannot cross. God's chosen are not protected because they are louder, stronger, or more aggressive. They are protected because they withdraw from disorder. They do not fight chaos. They leave it. This is where divine order quietly reasserts itself, not through confrontation, but through separation. When God's chosen choose peace over confrontation, clarity over explanation, alignment over vindication, they step back into their rightful position, not above anyone, not against anyone, but outside manipulation. This position is often misunderstood by the narcissist. They interpret silence as weakness. They mistake boundaries for fear. They assume distance signals defeat. But distance is where protection begins. Boundaries are not punishment. They are preservation. And as the chosen one withdraws, something profound begins to happen internally. The constant vigilance fades. The need to anticipate reactions dissolves. The nervous system, once conditioned to brace for impact, begins to settle. Peace, which had been under siege, starts to return. Not dramatically, not all at once. Quietly, sleep deepens, thoughts slow. The body no longer lives in a state of readiness. This is not accidental. It is the natural result of stepping back into order. God does not require his chosen to win arguments. He does not demand explanation or exposure. He requires alignment, and alignment carries protection. The narcissist, meanwhile, experiences the opposite movement. They continue circling the same unrest. They replay the same narratives. They escalate behaviors that no longer work. They cannot understand why access has been denied, why the reaction they depended on has vanished, why the power dynamic has shifted beyond their reach. But it has. The reversal is complete. The one who attempted to destabilize peace now lives without it. The one who was targeted for manipulation now lives free of it. This is not because God favored one person over another. It is because order always protects those who remain within it. Silence becomes a shield. Distance becomes a boundary. Alignment becomes defense. And the chosen one does not need to witness the narcissist's unraveling to know this truth. Life begins to move forward again. Energy returns to the body. Focus returns to the mind. Purpose returns to the soul. They are no longer defined by what they escaped. They are reoriented toward what they are becoming. This is the reversal. Narcissism cannot survive, because narcissism requires access. And God's chosen have withdrawn it, not in anger, not in pride, but in obedience to order. The final consequence, understanding consequence, not revenge. The most terrifying consequence is not collapse. It is not exposure. It is not isolation or unrest. The most terrifying consequence is this: divine order does not need human participation to prevail. This is where many people misunderstand justice. They imagine justice as an event, a confrontation, a downfall, a moment where wrong is publicly corrected and the innocent are vindicated. But biblical justice rarely works that way. Justice in its truest form is not dramatic. It is structural. When order is violated, consequences unfold not as punishment fueled by anger, but as the natural result of misalignment. This is what must be understood. A narcissist who messes with God's chosen is not struck down because God is offended emotionally. They unravel because they have placed themselves outside the conditions that allow stability, peace, and coherence to exist. This is not revenge. It is cause and effect within moral and spiritual law. Here is the educational truth many survivors need to hear clearly. Justice does not always look like immediate loss. It looks like progressive internal instability. The narcissist loses control, then coherence. They lose peace, then orientation. They lose access, then meaning. Meanwhile, the chosen one does not rise through retaliation. They rise through realignment. This corrects a dangerous misunderstanding. Many people remain emotionally tied to narcissistic abuse because they are waiting to see justice. They believe healing will come when consequences become visible, but healing comes when understanding replaces fixation. Understanding teaches this. You do not need to witness punishment to be released from harm. You do not need to expose someone for truth to assert itself. You do not need to fight disorder for order to prevail. Order restores itself when alignment is chosen. This is why silence matters. This is why withdrawal matters. This is why boundaries matter. They are not avoidance. They are participation in divine order. And divine order does not rush, argue, or explain itself. It simply outlasts disorder. For the narcissist, this is terrifying not because they are hated, but because they cannot manipulate what does not respond. For God's chosen, this is liberating not because someone else falls, but because they are no longer required to carry chaos. Justice is not about watching someone suffer. It is about recognizing why peace returns to one life and not another. Peace follows alignment. Unrest follows violation. That truth does not change based on personality, power, or position. And this is the final educational clarity. You were not protected because you were stronger. You were protected because you chose order over engagement, truth over reaction, and alignment over control. The narcissist's consequences unfold because disorder cannot sustain itself. Your restoration unfolds because order always does. That is not superstition. That is not wishful thinking. That is how moral and spiritual law has always functioned. And once this is understood, something shifts. You stop waiting for justice to arrive. You recognize it has already begun, not in their collapse, but in your freedom.